Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Civil 3D grading beyond the basics. What I'm going to try to do, based upon the amount of time that we have, is go through different scenarios in reference to working with Civil 3D. So the first thing that I'm going to make reference with in terms of what we're going to see today is just some of the basics in terms of what you will see with Civil 3D. So I'm just going to bring this up, so just to kind of give an overview in terms of what I'm going to talk about today. The basics in terms of simplifying models, how you can avoid redundant labels, using clearly 2D as you can see on the screen and 3D, using X references and data references, and how to really use quick views for orbiting so you can see things in 3D. I'm also going to talk about some best practices, avoiding AutoCAD commands in reference to working with feature lines. I'm going to talk about how to create better sites, how to minimize work in reference to grading. I'm also going to take a look at residential grading, commercial, in terms of what we're going to be able to see. So I've taken the time to go through several things in terms of what I've created. So we have 60 minutes. So I'm going to start out with the basics. From those basics, we're going to move to a little bit of the more advanced, but the thing that you want to keep in mind is the idea of understanding workflows when working with Civil 3D and any product for that matter. So over the years, we've gotten fixed to using the idea of picks and clicks with software, but it's really about workflows that really allow you to be more efficient and more productive. So as you can see on my screen, and again, I'm going to start out with some of the most basic things in reference to working with Civil 3D. So just to get to the point in terms of where I look at grading, everyone does grading from point to point, rise over run to get a slope or a grade. It's been used since the beginning of time. So one of the things that I will typically use when grading is the idea of working with feature lines. Feature lines are like 3D polylines on steroids. So just to quickly get across my point, I'm just going to draw a line here, and as you can see, I'm going to draw that line, and I'm just going to make it 100 feet. And here's the idea of this polyline. No big deal. So the idea behind why I use feature lines, and a polyline you can draw and create a feature line into from a polyline. But one of the things I want to get across really quickly is this idea of a feature line. I can pick on this polyline, right click, and go to properties and give it an elevation. I can also, from that properties box, go in and change the vertexes with elevations. But if I go to feature lines and create a feature line from an object, I want to assign this an elevation. I'm going to assign an elevation, and I'm just going to make it 100. And it's simple. It's at elevation 100. I pick on it, right click, go to my elevation editor. There's my elevation 100. This is the reason why I use feature lines when I'm grading instead of polylines. If I look up here at the top, I can insert elevations, delete elevation points, grab elevations from the surface, drape my feature line on top of a surface. I'm going to be doing some of these things during the course of this quick 60 minutes. So something as simple as raising the elevation, I can move it up a foot every time. So just think about, we have to think about outside of the box. If this was a rectangle, if this was a building pad, I can move this up 1/4 of an inch in increments. So a feature line gives you so much more flexibility. And then if I wanted to, at 100 feet, now some of us can calculate what 100 feet at 0.5% would be in terms of that distance. That works really well. So 0.5 in terms of that distance. But when we start getting into numbers beyond the 105, and so if I came in and said, well, 0.525, you're not going to calculate that as fast in terms of an odd 43 feet. You're not going to calculate it as fast as a feature line. So one of the reasons why I like using feature lines is the idea that it keeps my hand away from a calculator. The reason we use Civil 3D is so we can keep our hands away from doing all that analysis. So that's my quick spiel on feature lines. I'm just going to erase it, no big deal. So just some really quick things. We have a surface. When we pick on my surface, you can see it over there in 3D. All I've done, just to make things really quick and simple, because it's ideal with views we want to get across. So I noticed there's a number of individuals online. So some people are just now starting out with Civil 3D. Others are in the middle lane with Civil 3D, and others are a little bit more advanced. So I'm going to address from the basics all the way to the middle and then to the beyond. Okay, so simple viewport. This viewport always, when you look at a drawing, you're always looking on top. So from that on top, if I picked on it and picked on my surface and went to Object Viewer, I want to be able to look at that in 3D. There's my 3D view. Real quick stuff. If I come back over to Views, I'll go to Viewport, create two viewports. I want them to be side by side vertically. Just some simple things that I've done. When I pick on my surface, I'm going to go to Object Viewer. I always go to Object Viewer opposed to Orbit, because in Object Viewer, I can take a look at my object, close it, and I'm right back where I started. If I go to Orbit, a little bit different. It changes my UCS. And I don't want that to happen. But if you ever run into this scenario where you're seeing your X, Y, and Z, not the typical Y and X across the screen, just type in plan to get it back to where we want it. So then I'm just going to pick on my surface again. I'm going to right click, go to Object Viewer. I'm going to look at the surface in terms of how I want to see it in 3D. And then I'll just pick this set view. I call it a bullseye. And then I'll close out of that. And then I'll change my surface to shaded. Pretty straightforward. Now, the first thing that I want to do is, here's a polyline. I always work with this idea of polyline when I get things from CAD, but I want this to be a feature line. So all I'm going to do is something real simple. I'm going to offset this line a foot. And the idea behind this is I want to simulate visually what a retaining wall would look like. And clearly you can have two lines at the top and two lines at the bottom, but for visualization purposes, I'm going to do just two lines. So my top line, and if I look at it, I can see this elevation if I hold my cursor. One of the beauties of working with Civil 3D, I can see that that contour is at 1015. So up here at the top, under feature lines, I'm going to create feature lines from object. Select both feature lines. Select enter. I can put them in a site. Site 1 is fine. A site just kind of controls objects interacting with each other with Civil 3D. I want to assign elevations. It's going to put it on a specific layer. I'll select OK. I'm going to give it an elevation of 0. So if I pick on my feature line, one of them, right click, go to elevation editor, you can see it's at an elevation of 0. No big deal. That's exactly what I wanted. So the first thing is I want to make this an elevation of 1015. So if I just pick on this, I can just pick this double arrow down and just tell it 1015. 1015. So now that I have that first vertex 1015, I'm just going to unselect rows, And then I'm gonna pick in that first row to make sure it's 10, 15. And then I'm just gonna say I wanna go a constant on select rows. Then I'm gonna say I wanna use a constant elevation of that first row. I'm back at 10, 15. Again, trying to get across the idea why I don't use polylines. Okay, so that's at 10, 15. Again, one of the beauties of working with the feature line is I can grab elevations, and you can see the 10, 15 top there. One of the beauties of working with feature lines is the idea that we can, and we're just gonna close that out so we don't be bothered by that. I want to be able to grab the elevations and drape them on this existing ground. And again, drape along the existing ground. So if I go add to surface as a break line, I'm gonna add to surface as a break line. So several things, you can create your own surface. I can pull it from the existing ground surface, and I'll select OK. And then I can add as a break line. So there's a couple of different things that I can do with my feature line. So if I pick on that feature line again, I want to be able to grab elevations from this surface. When I select elevations from the surface, I can insert intermediate grade breaks. For those who are new and have Civil 3D 2018, you have the ability to make your feature line relative to your surface. We'll look at that later also. So I just want to drape it along my existing ground. I'll select OK. Now I have two feature lines. One at the bottom, and when I pick it, now both of them are up here in terms of elevations. So something really quick. Okay, so let me go to that free orbit, and we'll do just like that. So now we can see the two feature lines, and we see some ditch and things over there. I'll just zoom to it. So now what I want to do is from these feature lines, I want to build a surface. I want to add to surface as a break line. I'm going to create a new surface. I'm just going to call it wall, make it simple. And propose contours, that's fine. I'll go ahead and select OK, select OK, select OK. I'm getting close to where I want to be. So now we jump back on this side in 2D, and I'm just going to pick on my surface that I've just created. I'm going to go to edit surface style because I need to edit the triangles from this surface. I select OK. There's my triangles. I pick on my surface. I want to delete a line, come right through it, and there's my wall. Pretty straightforward. If I had two lines, I could address that also, okay, for the top of the wall and along the wall. So again, the beauty of working with feature lines, so much more flexibility. So if I came in and I picked my feature line, which is at the top there, I could come in at any point and insert an elevation point. So insert an elevation point, I can go along my feature line. If I pick just right here, it's saying that elevation is at 1015. I want this elevation to be at 1020. Something pretty simple. Hit enter and enter. And then I'll go over to my surface in the prospector tab and rebuild my wall. Straightforward. And we'll come back and delete those triangles. So just some really quick stuff. And there's my wall. So really simple flexibility. We'll go back one. Really simple flexibility in terms of working with a feature line. And you can see the height of that wall changes. And you can see it's draped along the ground, even in that ditch. Okay, something pretty straightforward. Okay, all right. So we're just moving along, moving along. So one of the things that we want to take a look at is this idea. of grading. So we're still on this premise of the basics. So anytime that I do grading, I'm always thinking of a drainage scheme first. Once I know what my drainage is, it's a lot easier to grade. So something as simple as this, we're looking at X reference, but never fear, we're going to address that from an X reference. So all I want to do is, again, some of us been using Civil 3D, and we got a corridor model here. If we go to Object Viewer, always nice to look at things in 3D. Got my corridor there. I even have a surface model here. Okay, so from this surface, some quick things that I will typically do, because I want to grade this parking lot. And my drainage scheme is I need the water draining down into specific inlets and then away from the site. So I'm going to make it real simple. I have the drainage scheme in my head. So I'm just going to pick on the surface because I don't know what the grades are coming up the entrance of this drive. But since I have a surface here, I can just pick on it and do a slope elevation. Now I'll type in T for 2 points, and I'll pick this point, and I'll pick this point. And it's about 1.5% in terms of that slope going up that drive. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a feature line. I'm going to create a feature line from scratch. And this feature line, I can give it a elevation. So I'm going to start out by giving it an elevation. So I'm going to pick right here at this point. It says specify elevation or from the surface. So I want that tying in. So I'm just going to type in SU for surface. There's the existing ground, and then there's that finished grade from my topo. So I'll say roll, and then it grabs that elevation. So from this point, I'm just going to pick that point, and it says, well, the last elevation that you came from was 188.709. I want to go a grade, type in G for grade. You see at the bottom at my command line, I can go a slope, an elevation, a difference, or the surface, or even a transition. So I'm just going to go G for grade, and I'm just going to type in 1.5%. That grabs an elevation from that point. And then I'm going to come up a little steeper here. I'm going to pick this point. I'm going to go up 4%. So I went up 4%, that grabs an elevation. And then I'm going to come right back down. And I'm going to say 2%. And I'm going to hit enter. So now, again, I don't use that polyline. I'm going to use this feature line, and I'm just going to go to my elevation editor. So everything that I just made reference to, I'm going to move this down a little bit so we can see. So I went up 1.5%, 4%, and then 2%. At any point in time, I can go in and say 3%. Change what that is. So I have a lot of flexibility in terms of working with feature lines. So now that I have that, everyone clearly could see that. We want to grade this parking lot 2% each way away from the island there. So I'm just going to pick on this feature line. I'm going to do a stepped offset. This stepped offset allows me to grade to a specific distance. So I'm just going to type in T for through, and I'm just going to pick this point out here. And it says specify elevation difference, grade, or variable. And I'm going to say G for grade, and I'm going to say 2%. I'm going to select stepped offset again. I'm going to type in T for through, and I'm going to get it beyond my parking lot. And I'm going to go up a grade of 2%. So now what I want to do is I want to take these 3 feature lines and I'm going to add them to a surface as a break line. And I'm just going to call this new surface, I'm just going to say 2% grade. And 2 and 10 background, that's fine, but I also, not only do I want to see 2 feet and 10 foot, I also want to see how my drainage is going. So I'm going to cut on my slope arrows. Select apply, select OK, select OK, select OK, select OK, select OK, select OK. That's a lot of OKs. So we're going to pick on this surface, which is our existing ground surface. And I'm just going to say no display, no big deal. So as I can see, here's my parking lot. I come into Object Viewer. So there's my drainage scheme. If we look at it, and for now, we're going to look at 3D wireframe so you can see it's still coming up and then it's draining each way to that island. Okay. So all I want to do now is I want to grade this parking lot. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make a feature line from the boundary of this parking lot. So I'm going to select create feature line from object. Because we have an X reference, I can just type in X and hit enter and then pull that parking lot polyline right out of my X reference. I'll hit enter and I'll say assign elevations. Well, I know I have to assign elevations, so I want to think back to this point to point where I start at one elevation from the existing entrance and start going point to point to determine my grades. But I've already did that with my drainage scheme. So I'm going to select assign elevations based upon this 2% grade drainage scheme. I want to insert intermediate grade breaks and I'm going to say okay. So now when I pick on that feature line has been graded. So that's that whole parking lot graded based upon that drainage scheme. So to get a little bit more, detailed, I'm going to pick on this feature line and I'm going to do a stepped offset. And so typically we know it's supposed to be 6 inches. So I'm going to do 0.1. I'm going to pick this side and I'm going to say 1 foot, just so we can really see what's happening in reference to my site. So I got my feature line. I don't need this anymore, this temporary surface. I don't need this feature line anymore. And I don't need this feature line anymore. I'll just erase it or I'll cut it off. So all I want to do is I want to build a surface based upon these 2 feature lines, this one and this one. And I'll say add to surface as a break line. I'm going to call this PK lot. So there's my parking lot. I'll select OK. I'll select OK. I'll make this small around the radiuses along my lot, and I'll select OK. There's my parking lot. So if I go to Object Viewer, there's that parking lot. So a little bit more detail, we need to go in and take out some of these triangles because it's triangulating. So just like in my last example, everyone knows how to edit a surface. So we need to cut on triangles first. So we'll cut the triangles on. And so I can see those, I'll make those a weird looking color and I'll select OK. So there's my triangles. I pick on my surface and I just go in and start deleting lines. So I can define these lines. Here's the parking lot, there. Just come right here, delete those out. Come right here, delete those out. Come right here, delete that out. Doing it real quick. Come right there, delete that out. Delete that line out. Zoom in a little bit more for more detail. Delete that out. Delete this portion out. This portion. We're getting detailed. So, and this is just work that you have to do in terms of building a surface model from Civil 3D. And again, if you take a look at what I'm doing here, it doesn't take much. Just getting acclimated, and it's again, same workflow I'm using with everything that I do today. This ideal of generating a surface model and then building it from that. And we want to come right in here. And so that's going to be it. So I'll right click, go to Object Viewer. There's my parking lot. Pretty straightforward. Step-by-step process from the basics to the more complex. So if I go ahead and close that, one of the things that I want to be able to do is, I need to determine spot grades and things like that at these corners. So I'll cut on my endpoint. I'll select Add Spot Elevations. So anywhere I pick now, if I pick on this side, it gives me a spot grade elevation. If I come on this other side here, it gives me a foot higher. So now I just pick some points. It's no big deal, the things that you have to do in reference to creating this data. Everything is dynamic, so any changes made are going to be updated. So something as simple as that. Again, the ideal behind building this model is so you can generate information from it. So when I pick on this, now if I move this over, you can see from 196.89, if I move that over 196.89, if I move that down 196.80, so it's reading from my model. So everything that happens with my surface, my labels are going to be addressed automatically. So something as simple as this. If I pick on my surface, go to surface properties, we're going to make those 1 foot, 1 in 5 design, select apply, select OK. You can see how that contour is running over that and running over that island. So I'll go to my object viewer, something real quick and simple. Okay, so from that point, if I picked on my surface and went into edit surface, I can go and raise my surface. So if my surface jumped up 50 feet, all my spot elevations jump up 50 feet. So anything that you can do, basically you can make reference to from this model. Okay, so pretty straightforward. So that grading has been addressed. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's see what kind of time. Okay, we got 105. So grading a parking lot, pretty straightforward. I mean, grading a corridor, that's like right out of the box if you've been working with corridors. On the parking lot, what I like to do also is to show a quick idea of what's happening in my site. So now I will draw a polyline. So I'm gonna go polyline from here to there to there. I'll pick on it, right click, create a quick profile. I'm not gonna select all surfaces. I'm just gonna select my parking lot surface. I'm gonna create a full grid, select OK. And I'll just pop it in right there. No big deal. There's my parking lot. It's draining down to that island. So some really quick stuff in terms of working with Civil 3D. And again, once you get the workflows set in, efficiency dramatically increases, productivity increases when you're working with Civil 3D. So one of the nice things that we also want to consider in 2018 and 2017, this idea of grading. So you can see I have some sub-assemblies over here in reference to my corridor. But one of the things you can do with corridors now, you can see I have a alignment here. So we have an alignment in our drawing. So the beauty of working with that is you could create a feature line from an alignment. So this idea of alignment, creating a profile, then from the profile, creating a finished grade, maybe we just want to create a corridor based upon that existing ground. So let's think about that. So we'll create feature line from alignment, and I'll pick on my alignment. And it says basically that alignment is Mission Avenue, and I'm going to put it on a basic feature style, and I'm going to select OK. And then it says, do you want to weave things out? And I'm just going to select OK. So now if I pick on this, I've generated a feature line. If I right click and go to elevation editor, those elevations are at elevation 0. From that, and I don't really need elevations, even though if I hold my cursor right there, there's an existing road surface. So I can grab the elevations from that surface from the feature line. So if I pick on it, I could just go ahead and select grab elevations, and we're going to do something. We're going to deselect intermediate grades. And I'm just going to say existing road. And when I select OK, pick my feature line, hit enter. If I right click on that, go to elevation editor, I've grabbed existing elevations. So one of the things that you will run into is it will only go from vertex to vertex when you do that and you select to not pick insert intermediate grade breaks. So when I pick on that again, I'm going to insert intermediate grade breaks. It says part of this feature line is off the surface. Do you want to modify the elevations of that part is on the surface? I can go ahead and select yes. Now I've grabbed the elevations along that feature line. Okay, and we got some stuff going on down here at the bottom where we're at elevation 0. So let's just pop in something real quick. 7.8, and we'll zoom back up a little bit. 157.9. Oh, okay. Still making good time. And we'll come in here and we'll say 167.5. And one more down. 167.9. Okay. So quick editing. It's simple. So one of the things that you're able to do is, now you can think of this as curb islands. You can think of this as a wall, back a curb. I'm just going to use it as a center line. So when I go up to corridors, I can create a corridor. So typically in the past, to create a corridor, you needed 3 things. You needed an assembly, you needed a profile, and you needed a horizontal alignment. Now you can use a feature line to create a corridor. So it doesn't matter what side I'm going in. I'm going to pick a feature line from the screen, and we'll just pick it from the screen. And I'm just going to give it a name called center line. And I'll select OK. And from that center line, I'm just going to use this collector full, residential full subassembly. And then the targeted surface, I'm just going to say existing ground topo, and then select OK. And then it brings up this in terms of targets. I'm going to select existing topo, Existing ground. How about that? Okay, no big deal. So there's no targets. So I'll select OK, and then I'll rebuild the corridor. Shazam! There we go. Here's my corridor. Object viewer. There's my corridor. So pretty straightforward. Now, to get beyond that ideal of you needing 3 objects, now I just got corridor with sidewalks. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so it's 1:11. All right. Hopefully we're rocking and rolling, and there will be questions at the end, hopefully. So everyone knows how to create a boundary from your surface. I'm a boundary from your corridor and surface. So I'll go in and select corridor surfaces, create a surface. I'll use the top. I'll add as a break line, and I'll say just the top link. And then on the boundary, I'm going to right click and select corridor extents as my boundary. Select OK. Select rebuild the corridor. Ha! There's my surface. I would say Shazam. Yeah, Shazam. There we go. Okay, so again, just as an example, this should be grading in a specific direction. I'll do a water drop. Pretty simple. I'll just pick right here. Let's take this object snap off. We'll just pick right there and see where the water is drying into. So it's working the way it's supposed to. Okay, now I can determine where my inlets should go. Okay, so that's Mission Avenue. Okay, so now let's jump to, there's my retaining wall. Nothing in my drawing too. How about here? Okay, let's do this real quick. In Civil 3D, this concept of creating this feature line to give you this wall, there's been a wall break line in Civil 3D for 7 years. I don't know if you've known that, but I'm just going to show it real quick. Okay, so where are we at here? We'll go ahead and pick retaining walls. And then I'm going to explode that coming in and select OK. Okay, so here's my wall. So I got a lot here. So in terms of lot grading, I like to show this in 2D and 3D. So we're going to do this really quick. Just back to the basics. Viewports, 2 viewports, vertically. There's my viewport. Okay, so I want to work with lot 1, and if I hold my cursor right there, that elevation is 197. Okay, 197. Okay, so and then I'll come here, and we're going to pick on this corridor, because it's the simplest thing for me to look at right now. Pick on this corridor, and just flip it just like that. And I'm just going to set view. Once I set my view, and then I'm going to come out of that. Okay, so from that view, I'm going to change this from 2D wireframe to shaded. How about that? Okay, so now that I'm at this lot, if I right click, I can do a free orbit a little bit and show you what's going on here at this lot back here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is over here, this surface is called residential surface. Okay, so always naming convention is critical in Civil 3D because we do a lot of jumping around and we like to reference things from one to another in terms of communicating and building these models. So residential surface, I'm going to come in the definition. I want to create a break line. I'm going to add a break line. This is going to be a wall break line. I'm going to select OK. I'm going to pick this feature line. It says, well, what side do you want to put this wall on? I'm going to put it on that side. It prompts me to enter options for wall heights. I'm going to say all. And then for that wall elevation, we're at 197. So let's do 196. So 196 for my elevation. So E for elevation. And then that says 198. Let's do it at 196. There's my wall. And I could have made that at 198 right at the top. So there's my wall. So on the left side in 2D, on the right side, clearly in 3D. So building models, and then for all intents and purposes, I'll go here again, add a break line. This is going to be a standard break line, but I'm going to add it into this residential surface right here, this feature line. And you can use parcel lines the same way as feature lines. So it's just grading that lot just in case you got a swell in the back, things like that, and just grading that lot out. And clearly, if you start putting in, you know, let's see what that elevation is. That elevation is 193. Okay, so let's do one more quick one. I'll go ahead and add that in, and we're going to call that a wall. I'm going to select OK. I'm going to pick that feature line. We're going to pick that side. We're going to hit all. I'm going to type E for elevation. I'm going to say 194. There's my wall. So some really quick things you can do with the same workflows, from the basics to the more dynamic. So there's my wall. So the idea of this wall site, we still just a little bit beyond in reference to this feature line, because we're still talking about grading. If we look at, okay, so we got a site here, and we've looked at parking lot. So one of the things that happened was, let's say we talked with this developer, and they came back and said, well, maybe we need to move this site up or down in reference to our finished grade. So we do have a finished grade. So if I go to model here, we do have this finished grade for this parking lot. It's already been graded, so I'm not going to take a lot of time doing that. So if I come to shade it, pretty straightforward. Okay. Now, we have two feature lines. So what I want to do is, the developer is talking about moving the site up and down, up or down. So if that is the case, based upon these elevations, if I pick on this right here, and I go into add a spot elevation, so something real simple, I'll add a spot elevation. That's at 1255. If I pick on my existing ground and add a spot elevation, that's at 1250. So there's a 5-foot difference in less than 10 feet or 5 feet. So we need to address that by putting a wall. And now he's saying we want to raise our finished grade for our parking lot. So one of the things that you can uniquely do with Civil 3D, if I go to Control 3, there is a retaining walls subassembly. So I'm going to keep that in mind. I know I can build a corridor from an assembly now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to build a corridor. I'm going to go up to corridors, create a corridor. I want to use a feature line. Feature line W. We're going to pick what feature line we want to use, though. And we'll pick this feature line right here. And that's going to be fine. The assembly that we're going to use is this retaining wall. I've already dropped it in there for all intents and purposes to make this happen quickly. So then I want to go to the existing ground. And I don't need to set any baseline or regions. I'll just select OK. Okay, so if I pick on this, right click, and go to Object Viewer, there's my retaining wall. But in the back of my mind, I know this developer is saying, okay, well, I'm going to tell him this, then I'm going to tell him that, and then we'll see how he addresses it. So thanks to the beauty of feature lines, when I pick on that, if I go to Elevation Editor, which I can go here, or Elevation Editor, now in 2018, now I can say, I want to make that relative to the surface. Finished grade surface. So that's fine. So now, and we'll show this in two views. So quickly, 2 views. And we'll go vertically. And again, let's pick on this and just right click, go to object viewer. And I could have just picked it. Oh, and we got a pond back there. Imagine that. We'll pick on that, right click and go to object viewer. And there's my site. And then I'll hit the set view and then I'll come right out of that. Okay, so here's my surface. Okay, so this surface here, if I go to edit surface style and I look at it in model, we can see triangles are gray. Let's turn those to something different so we can see that. Select apply, select OK. So we can see that surface now. So from this, this existing ground on the edit surface style, on the model, I'm just going to cut those triangles off so we can just see this surface. So I'm just working with this ideal of this surface. So I'll come in here now, and there's my surface, and there's my retaining wall. So from that, now the developer comes in and says, okay, we need to edit that surface. We're going to raise that surface 5 feet. I raise the surface 5 feet. My retaining wall dynamically raises 5 feet. Okay, so the beauty of working with this model and some of the functionality with feature lines, you can't get beyond if you're thinking efficiency and productivity. And as drafters, designers, engineers, etc., we should be thinking return on investment, especially with the software that we use. Like owners are thinking return on investment, because when we start thinking like owners, we become more efficient and more productive in terms of what we want to accomplish in our projects. So, okay, so that's the retaining wall from the feature line. Cul-de-sac. All right, we got a couple minutes. So, in fact, let's do this residential lot. Okay, so here you can see I have this residential lot, and you clearly can see I got some spot grade elevations and things going on. But these are all feature lines. So I want to build a model from that. So if you've got something in 2D and you want to create it in 3D, clearly feature lines would address it. So if I go to view, viewport, and go to 2 viewports, and we'll say vertically, and we'll move this over here. And then up here at the top, we want to go not from 2D, we go to shaded. That's fine. And then we'll say Southwest isometric. And we'll zoom in. That zoomed way into that site. And we're just moving here. Okay, so something really quick. This little berm over here. If I pick a feature line, I'll right click, and I'll say add to surface as a break line. And I'll create this surface, and I'll say this is going to be my mound. And we're not going to use standard. We're going to use one in propose contours. So contours, propose 1 footers. Select OK. Select OK. Select OK. So it created a little surface for me over there. Okay, so from that surface, again, let's just cut on the triangles, make it simple. From that, we need to edit surface. So delete lines and Shazam. And I'm not going to do it real detailed, but now when we can come in here, we can pick on that feature line, and we're going to do the same thing. If I right click, add to surface as a break line, that's going to be part of my mound. Select OK. Select OK. Now we got a ditch there. So, and the only difference between a mound and this ditch is the elevations. So if I pick on that, right click, go to elevation editor, we can set this increment. I'm going to set it to 5 feet. So now that I have that increment set to 5 feet, I'll just raise it up. If I look over here under my mound, have that on rebuild automatically, pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's move that back down 5 feet. Okay, so we're just moving along here. So from that, we're gonna select this feature line. From this feature line, I'm gonna add to the surface as a break line. I'm gonna call this mound 2. So M2, and we're just rocking and rolling. If I came in and I'll say propose contours 1 footers, and select OK, and select OK, and select OK. So there's that mound over there. I'll come right in, pick on it, go in edit surface, delete lines. And I'm just talking a little faster because I'm trying to recognize and be cognizant of your time and anybody else's who might be walking around waving their hands talking about, you got 5 minutes. Okay, so we'll put that in, and then we'll pick this feature line and this feature line and this feature line, and we'll right click, add to surface. So this feature line, this feature line, this feature line. I'll go to mound 2 on the break lines. You didn't think I could do it, but add break lines, select OK. And now there's my mound 2 over there. Okay, so some really quick stuff. So as an example, let's do one more because I have 26 after. So let's look at this house and this driveway. So we're gonna pick on this and pick on that. I'm gonna say add to surface as a break line, add. And then the surface, we're gonna say, we'll call it house. From this house, we're gonna use the same thing in terms of proposed contours. 1 footers. Select OK, select OK. See what we built. Select OK. Okay, so there's a little surface coming in there. So all I want to do now, and if you look at what I've created, what's been created, and some of these ideas have come from other individuals. So again, but it's the same premise, it's the same concept that we want to use. So for instance, this break line here, we want to add this into our surface called house. Select OK, select OK. As you can see, we're starting to build a pad, and now let's build from this feature line, and it's easier to pick over here. So I'll go in and I'll select right click and select add to surface called house. We'll select OK. And now you can see in terms of what I'm starting to build in reference to just feature lines. So then I'll pick on this feature line, and you can see it's stepped up, which is the beauty of working with the feature line. And I'll right click and I'll select add to surface called house and select OK. Okay, so now as an example, we can kind of get an idea of what we're building. If we need to drop a driveway and slope down and some building and footprint. So, and again, it's all from the same premise in terms of what we're building. Okay. Ultimately, and again, if I go way out on a limb, right click and select similar. We're going to add those to this house. And some of them already are, and it just says that, which is fine. Okay, so we have everything in there now in terms of the house, free orbit. Okay. Okay, so we have a basement, we got some existing ground. We could go in and take those triangles out to address that, but that's just from that stepping up, and that's okay for me right now. So I'll go ahead and exit, and the next thing that I want to do, we'll go back one time. We'll bring that back over. So I'm just going to create one more surface. So I'll create this surface called total. And this is going to be proposed one further, and we're going to go over a little bit with time, but that's okay. I'll take, well, I gotta say that, but it'll work out. So we'll select OK. So for my other surfaces, I'm going to select no display. So no display, hidden, that's fine. This is mount, right click, and I could have selected the surfaces, and everyone does things differently for time purposes. I'm just trying to get these things out of the way. Okay, so real quick, so everything is hidden. Okay, so now from my total surface, I want to combine everything. So if I go to edits, right click, I want to paste the surface. So we're going to paste this house surface in first. Select OK. There's my house surface. Secondly, I'm going to paste my mound surface in. And then third, I'm going to paste my mound too. And clearly you can see that ultimately you're building a site that is tying into. Okay, so some real nice stuff in reference to the surface. And then ultimately, if I pick on this feature line, I can add to this surface called total. Just some really quick stuff to address building the surface model. Okay, so some really nice things to address working with this surface model. Okay, so hopefully I've addressed some of the things that you run into, whether it's commercial or residential, whether it's roads, whether it's walls. I didn't get to the cul-de-sac, which is no different from some of the other things that I've done today. But the ideal behind it is we want to develop a workflow. So no matter what project is thrown in front of us, we will be able to address, and clearly making modifications. Again, efficiency, productivity, and workflows ultimately equals a return on this investment of software that you're using. And again, software is just not about picks and clicks, because we're not just using AutoCAD anymore. We're using an analysis and design tool to address a lot of problematic things in terms of working on a site. So hopefully you've enjoyed this webcast. I tried to get into everything that I could, and we'll go from there.